So what are you saying, Trent? Whitney's voice cracked, tears streaking down her face. He didn't even look up from his phone. I'm saying I want an open marriage. The room went silent, only the sound of their baby monitor humming in the background. She stared at the man she'd sacrificed everything for, 3 pregnancies, sleepless nights, and years of faithfulness, and realized she wasn't speaking to her husband anymore. She was speaking to a stranger. And he had just broken something he could never repair. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica. Whitney Wallace never thought marriage could feel this lonely. In the quiet hours before sunrise, she'd slip out of bed, make breakfast for her 3 children, and pack lunches while her husband scrolled through his phone, barely glancing her way. At 36, she carried the weight of motherhood, literally and emotionally. Her body had changed since their 3rd child, and she hated how her jeans fit now. But what hurt more was how Trent noticed. At first, it was little jokes. "You used to be smaller when we met," he'd say with a smirk. Then, the comments turned sharper. "You should really take better care of yourself, Whit. I work hard, it'd be nice to come home to a wife who tries." Every word carved something out of her. When they'd married 12 years ago, Trent couldn't take his eyes off her. He'd call her his angel, his forever. Back then, they were broke, living in a tiny apartment with mismatched furniture, but they were happy. He'd hold her belly during her first pregnancy and say, "We're building something no one can break." But somewhere along the way, money changed him. Success made him colder. He became the kind of man who cared more about appearances than memories, more about what others thought of him than how his wife felt beside him. Whitney knew something was wrong the day he started leaving for networking dinners 3 times a week. She wanted to believe he was just busy. Until one night, his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. She didn't mean to look, but she saw it. A text from a woman named Lacey. "Can't stop thinking about last night." Her breath caught in her throat. The woman worked at his office. When he came out, she confronted him, voice trembling, heart breaking. "How long, Trent?" He didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. He just shrugged and said, "Don't start drama, Whit. It's not what you think." But it was exactly what she thought. And worse. Days later, she overheard him on the phone with a friend, laughing about how women just let themselves go after kids. The words sliced through her. That night, when he came home late again smelling of perfume, she finally snapped. They argued in the kitchen, their voices echoing off the tile. The kids were asleep upstairs. Whitney demanded answers. "Why are you doing this? I gave you everything." Trent's voice was cold, flat, as if rehearsed. "Because I'm tired of living with a woman who stopped being a wife and started being a babysitter. You've changed, Whitney. And I want options." The floor seemed to vanish beneath her. "Options?" He poured himself a drink. "I want an open marriage." The words hung there, heavy, cruel, final. She felt dizzy. "You mean, you want permission to cheat?" He smirked. "Don't make it sound so ugly. This way we're both free." Free. The word made her sick. She stood there, trembling, unable to speak. He finished his drink and walked past her like she was furniture. The man she'd loved since college, the one she bore 3 children for, had just shattered her world with one sentence. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while the baby monitor flickered beside her. Every memory, their wedding vows, their first apartment, his promise to love her through anything, all replayed in her head like cruel echoes. And in the middle of that heartbreak, something inside her went quiet. It wasn't numbness, it was awakening. She realized she'd been living her life around his comfort, his ego, his validation. Every diet, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, all for a man who looked at her like a burden. By morning, she wasn't crying anymore. She was done. The next day, she dropped the kids at school, dressed up for the first time in years, not for him, but for herself. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. The tired mom was gone. In her place was a woman who'd forgotten what she was worth. When she walked into the kitchen, Trent looked up from his laptop, surprised. "Going somewhere?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Out." He narrowed his eyes. Out where? She didn't answer. Just grabbed her keys and walked out the door. That was the first time in 12 years she didn't explain herself to him. And for the first time, he watched her leave. That evening, when she returned, he barely glanced at her, assuming she'd come crawling back like always. But she hadn't. She was quiet, calm, unreadable. In her heart, she knew something had shifted, not in him, but in her. Trent had given her permission to be free. He just didn't know what that would cost him. Some heartbreaks aren't meant to destroy you, they're meant to wake you up. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone you loved, don't just scroll. Subscribe. Because every time you do, you help remind another woman that her worth doesn't depend on who stays, but on how she rises after they leave. Whitney didn't recognize the woman staring back at her in the mirror anymore, and for the first time, that was a good thing. It had been a week since Trent's cruel, open marriage proposal, and instead of breaking down, she'd gone quiet. Not the silence of surrender, the silence of focus. Every morning after dropping the kids at school, she went for a walk through Zilker Park. She didn't run, she just breathed. The cool Austin air cleared her head, step by step. She started eating better, sleeping better, and spending less time scrolling through her husband's social media, where his perfect life looked nothing like hers. She began reading again, something she hadn't done since before her first child was born. She even signed up for a community art class, something she'd always wanted to try. And slowly, she began to feel pieces of herself returning. At first, Trent barely noticed the change. He was still spending nights at work, and when he did come home, he'd complain that dinner wasn't warm enough or that the kids were too loud. Whitney no longer engaged. She simply smiled, said, "Okay," and went about her evening. That shift, her calm detachment, unsettled him more than any shouting match could. One Thursday, while waiting in line at a coffee shop, Whitney ran into Damian Cole, an old friend from college. He'd been the one person who always believed in her talent back when she was studying design. He looked the same, relaxed, confident, carrying that easy Texas charm that used to make her laugh. "Whitney Wallace," he said, smiling. "Haven't seen you since graduation day." She laughed softly, the sound almost foreign to her. "Guess 3 kids and a few gray hairs later, life happens." She grinned. "You look incredible, Whit. Motherhood suits you." The compliment hit differently. It wasn't laced with pity or sarcasm. It was genuine. They chatted briefly, then exchanged numbers after he mentioned an upcoming charity dinner for a children's foundation. "You should come," he said. "It's a casual event, good food, great people." For the first time in years, she said yes to something that had nothing to do with her husband. That Saturday, Whitney dressed up carefully, a soft navy dress that hugged her curves without hiding them, silver earrings she hadn't worn since before her first pregnancy. When she walked downstairs, Trent nearly dropped his coffee mug. "Where are you going?" he asked suspiciously. "Out," she said simply. "With who?" She met his eyes. "A friend." He forced a laugh. "A male friend?" She didn't answer, just grabbed her purse and walked out. Trent sat there, jaw tight, staring at the door long after it closed. Something inside him twisted, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Jealousy. At the dinner, Whitney felt alive. The music, the conversation, the laughter, it was like remembering she could breathe again. Damian was kind and funny, introducing her to people who didn't look at her as someone's wife, but as Whitney, talented, smart, beautiful. When the night ended, Damian walked her to her car. "You know," he said gently, "Trent's a fool if he doesn't see what he's got." She smiled sadly. "He sees it. He just doesn't value it." "Then maybe someone else should," he replied. That night, Whitney went to bed smiling for the first time in years. Not because of a man, but because she realized how far she'd come from the woman who begged for attention. Over the next week, Trent noticed her more. Her laughter filled the house again. She left scented candles burning, wore perfume, hummed while cleaning, and that unnerved him. He started asking questions. "Who's texting you? Where are you going?" She answered calmly, "Just out." He couldn't stand it. The irony burned him. He'd asked for an open marriage, but now he hated the thought of her living by his rules. When she came home late one night after another dinner, he was sitting on the couch waiting, pretending to watch TV. "You've been out a lot lately," he said flatly. Whitney set her purse down. "I have." "With the same guy?" She turned to him, calm and composed. "You mean Damien?" "He's a good friend." "Friend?" Trent scoffed. "He's divorced and probably looking for someone to fix him." She crossed her arms. "Maybe he's just spending time with someone who doesn't make him feel broken." The words hit him like a slap. He didn't respond. Just watched her walk upstairs, her perfume lingering behind her like a quiet reminder of what he'd lost. The next day, Trent couldn't focus at work. Every time his phone buzzed, he wondered who she was with. Lacey, his mistress, called. He ignored it. When she finally showed up at his office, furious that he'd ghosted her, he snapped, "We're done, Lacey." "Done?" she shouted. "You made me leave my boyfriend for you." He didn't care. He just needed to get home. That night, when Whitney got back from another social event, he was pacing the living room. "Whitney," he blurted, "I think we need to talk." She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" This whole open marriage thing. It's getting out of hand." She smiled faintly. "Out of hand? You mean out of your control?" He clenched his fists. "You're embarrassing me." "No, Trent," she said softly. "You did that all by yourself." She turned and started up the stairs. "Whitney," he called after her. "Are you sleeping with him?" She paused halfway up, hand on the railing. The silence stretched. Then she looked over her shoulder. "Does it matter? You're the one who wanted freedom." And with that, she disappeared into their bedroom, leaving him standing there, furious, confused, and terrified for reasons he didn't yet understand. That night, Trent lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he replayed every cruel thing he'd said to her, every time he called her lazy, every moment he looked past her at another woman. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he'd unleashed something he couldn't control. He wanted her trapped in his shadow, but she'd stepped into her own light. And that scared him more than anything. The next morning, Trent pulled into the office parking lot only to see something that made his stomach drop. Across the street, Whitney stood beside Damien's car, laughing, radiant, free. Damien leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face, their eyes meeting in a way Trent hadn't seen in years. She looked happy. And that's when it hit him, she wasn't pretending anymore. She was moving on. For the first time in years, Trent Wallace felt powerless in his own home. He'd built an empire from nothing, real estate, connections, wealth, but now, in the quiet space of his house, he couldn't control the one thing that used to define him, his wife's attention. Whitney's laughter haunted him. It wasn't the tired, polite sound he'd grown used to, it was lighter, freer, full of a confidence he hadn't heard in years. Every time she dressed up to leave the house, his chest tightened. Every time she came home late, his temper simmered beneath the surface. He had wanted an open marriage, but watching her glow again felt like punishment. The first week, he told himself it was a phase. By the second, he started checking her phone when she was in the shower. When that didn't satisfy him, he followed her one evening, parking across the street from the restaurant where she was having dinner with Damien. He watched through the window as she laughed, head tilted, eyes sparkling, her hand briefly touching Damien's arm. That small gesture burned through him like fire. For the first time, Trent realized what jealousy actually felt like. Not anger. Fear. He went home that night and tore apart his office looking for the courage to call her. But when he finally did, she didn't answer. The next morning, he confronted her in the kitchen. "You think this is funny?" he snapped, slamming his coffee mug down. Whitney turned calmly, unbothered. "What?" "You and your little dinner dates with Damien." She looked at him for a long second. "We're friends, Trent. Isn't that what open marriages allow?" The words dripped with irony. She wasn't raising her voice or crying anymore. That scared him more than her anger ever did. "I didn't mean it like this," he muttered. She tilted her head. "Then how did you mean it?" He opened his mouth but had no answer. Whitney smiled faintly, grabbed her purse and said, "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." And then she was gone. At work, Trent couldn't concentrate. His assistant, Lacey, The same woman he'd once cheated with, walked in wearing a fitted dress and her usual smirk. "What's wrong, boss? Don't tell me your wife's the one cheating now." The way she said it, half teasing, half venom, snapped something inside him. "She's not cheating," he said sharply. "She's just living her life." Lacey laughed. "Wow. You really have changed. Maybe I should have waited for that version of you." He glared at her. "You should go." But she didn't move. "You don't get to play the victim now, Trent. You made your bed, go lie in it alone." And with that she stormed out, slamming the door. For the first time, Trent realized he'd destroyed not just his marriage but the illusion of control he had over people. Everyone around him was slipping away. That evening he came home to an empty house. The kids were with Whitney's mother for the weekend, and she wasn't answering his texts. Her absence felt louder than her presence ever did. He sat on the couch staring at a family photo, Whitney holding their youngest, smiling at him like he was her whole world. He'd traded that for ego. For validation. For nothing. He poured himself a drink and scrolled through her social media. Each photo felt like a dagger, her at the art class with her new friends, her laughing with Damien at the charity dinner, her in that blue dress that hugged every curve he'd once mocked. He didn't recognize her anymore, and that terrified him. He'd pushed her so far away that she'd built a world without him in it. A few days later, Trent was forced to face his humiliation in public. It was their son's school fundraiser, a big community event. Parents, teachers, and neighbors all gathered at the local recreation hall. Trent arrived expecting a quiet evening. Instead, he saw Whitney and Damien together near the refreshments table. She looked radiant, her hair soft around her shoulders, her laughter effortless. Damien leaned close, handing her a cup of punch, and she smiled up at him. Trent felt his face flush. His heart hammered in his chest as whispers began around him. "Isn't that Trent's wife? She's with someone new already. Good for her. She deserves better." He clenched his fists and stormed across the room. "Whitney, can I talk to you for a second?" he hissed. Damien stepped slightly forward, protective but calm. Whitney sighed. "What is it, Trent? What are you doing with him? Are you trying to humiliate me?" She raised an eyebrow. "No. You did that to yourself." He looked around at the watching faces. "You're still my wife." She smiled sadly. "Then you should have acted like a husband." Her words silenced the entire room. Trent's face went red. He turned, fists tight, and walked out before anyone could see the tears threatening his composure. That night, Whitney sat alone in her car after the event, replaying what happened. For years, she'd cried over him. Now, seeing him crumble under the weight of his own arrogance, she didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. She had outgrown the version of herself who begged to be loved. Sometimes the people who break us teach us our strength without ever meaning to. Whitney didn't fight to win him back. She fought to find herself again. If you've ever been blamed for someone else's unhappiness, subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another Whitney is realizing she doesn't have to shrink to be loved. Meanwhile, Trent couldn't sleep. He replayed her words at the fundraiser over and over. "Then you should have acted like a husband." Each syllable felt like a sentence he deserved. The next morning, he called in sick and drove to the lake where they used to take the kids. He sat there for hours, staring at the water. His phone buzzed, a message from Whitney. For a moment, hope surged. But when he opened it, it was brief. "Trent, I'll be filing for separation next week. Please respect my decision. I'll always want you to be a good father, but I need peace." He stared at the message until the words blurred. The man who wanted freedom now had it. And for the first time in his life, freedom felt like a curse. That night, he returned home to an empty house. The scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway. He walked into the kitchen and noticed her art supplies still sitting on the counter, a half-finished painting of wildflowers. He picked up the brush and held it between his fingers. It hit him all at once. How she'd found beauty in the chaos he created, how she'd learned to paint again while he'd been too busy chasing approval from strangers. A week later, as Trent pulled into his driveway, he froze. There she was, Whitney, standing at the front door, radiant in a flowing white blouse, smiling politely as Damien helped her carry boxes. For a brief, delusional second, Trent thought she'd come home. Then he noticed the moving truck parked on the curb. She wasn't returning. She was moving out. Trent had never known silence could feel this loud. The house that once echoed with the chatter of children and Whitney's laughter now sounded like a hollow shell. Even the ticking clock in the living room seemed to mock him with every second that passed. The day she moved out, he'd stood at the window watching as Damien helped her load the final box into the truck. He wanted to shout something, anything, to stop her. But his throat refused to work. All he could do was watch as the car pulled away, taking with it every ounce of warmth that had ever lived in that house. That night, he didn't sleep. He wandered from room to room, noticing things he'd never cared about before. The half-burned vanilla candle in the kitchen. The kids' drawings still stuck to the fridge. The dent in the couch where Whitney used to sit and nurse their youngest. He touched the pillow where she used to sleep, inhaling the faint scent of her hair, and felt something break open in his chest. He'd gotten everything he wanted: space, freedom, silence. But none of it felt like winning. The next morning his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. Whitney called. She said she'll drop the kids off Saturday morning. Please, Trent, don't make a scene. He stared at the screen, guilt flooding every corner of him. His own mother, who once defended him no matter what, had switched sides. And maybe she was right to. When Saturday came, Whitney arrived with the kids. She looked different. Brighter. Her hair fell in loose waves, her makeup subtle, her smile real. She carried herself with calm confidence, the kind that couldn't be faked. Trent tried to make small talk as the kids ran upstairs. You look nice, he said, voice soft, unsure. Thank you, she replied, not meeting his eyes. He hesitated, then asked, You seeing him? She stopped, her hand resting on her purse strap. Damien? We're friends. He nodded, but the jealousy twisted inside him like glass. Whitney, his voice cracked. I miss you. She sighed, turning to face him fully. Trent, you miss control. Not me. That one sentence hit harder than any argument they'd ever had. Over the next few weeks, Trent tried everything. Texts, calls, flowers, long apologies that always ended up unsent. Whitney didn't block him, she just didn't respond. He threw himself into work, but his focus was gone. Deals fell through, meetings blurred together. His assistant quit. His business partner pulled out of a major project. It was as if the universe had decided to hold a mirror to the chaos he'd created. One night, after another long day, he came home to find the power flickering. Bills had piled up on the counter, things Whitney had always handled quietly without complaint. He sat there in the dark, staring at the past due notices, and realized how much she'd carried without ever being thanked. Every little thing he'd mocked her for, her routines, her worry, her overthinking, had been the glue holding their life together. And without her, everything fell apart. Meanwhile, Whitney's life blossomed. She began working with a local design studio, her natural creativity shining through. Her clients loved her warmth and practicality. Her children adored her energy now that she wasn't walking on eggshells every day. People noticed the glow in her face, the way she spoke with calm confidence. She didn't brag, didn't post revenge pictures, didn't flaunt anything. She simply lived better. And that quiet dignity made Trent's pain even worse. He started attending therapy, desperate to understand why he'd destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him. The counselor's words were simple: you didn't lose her because she changed. You lost her because she finally stopped trying. Weeks passed. One evening, as he picked up the kids from Whitney's new townhouse, he saw Damien's car parked out front. The sight stung more than he wanted to admit. When Whitney came to the door, she smiled politely. They're just finishing homework. Want to come in? He stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and lavender, warm and alive. On the wall hung new photos. Whitney and the kids at the zoo, Whitney laughing at a picnic, Whitney painting with her daughter. In one frame, he spotted Damien in the background, holding a paintbrush, smiling. Trent's stomach turned. Looks like you've been busy, he said. Whitney nodded. Busy is good. He hesitated, then said quietly, I'm trying, you know. Therapy. No more drinking. I'm working on myself. She nodded, genuine compassion in her eyes. I'm glad. Truly. For a second, he saw a glimpse of the woman who once looked at him with pure love, and it hurt even more knowing that look would never come back the same way. Whitney, he whispered, I made a mistake. I didn't mean any of it. The things I said, the open marriage, the way I treated you, God, I'd take it all back if I could. Her voice was calm, almost tender. I believe you. But taking it back doesn't undo what it did. That night, after dropping the kids at his mother's, Trent drove aimlessly through Austin. He passed the restaurant where Whitney had once laughed with Damien, the park where they used to take the kids, the tiny bakery she used to love but he never had time for. Every corner of the city held a memory of what he'd lost. He stopped at a red light and caught his reflection in the mirror, tired, older, broken. He whispered to himself, I was supposed to be her forever. The light turned green, but he didn't move. The next morning, Whitney received a message from him. I'm sorry, Whit. Not for losing you, but for wasting the time I could have spent cherishing you. You deserved better than me. She stared at it for a long time before typing back. We both deserved better than who we were then. She hit send, feeling peace for the first time in years. That weekend, Trent went to their son's soccer game. When Whitney arrived with Damien and the kids ran into the field laughing, Trent smiled faintly from the bleachers. When Whitney glanced his way, he gave her a small nod. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet acceptance. She nodded back. In that moment, he knew he'd never get her back, but maybe, just maybe, he could still be a better man for the family they built together. As the game ended, rain started to fall. Trent offered to help pack the chairs, but Damien beat him to it, holding the umbrella over Whitney as they laughed and ran to the car. Trent stood there, rain soaking through his shirt, watching the taillights fade into the distance. He whispered under his breath, I never realized how beautiful she looked when she wasn't trying to please me. And as he turned back toward his empty car, he finally understood what real loss felt like. The rain came down harder that night, but for Trent, it felt deserved, as if the sky was finally washing away the lies he'd told himself for years. He sat in his car outside the empty house, headlights off, listening to the storm drum against the roof. Every drop reminded him of her laughter, her patience, the moments he had ignored. He thought about the first time Whitney had told him she loved him, how he'd smiled and said it back without realizing how heavy that promise would become. Now, all he had left were echoes. In the weeks that followed, Trent tried to rebuild, but everything he touched felt smaller without her presence. He went to therapy twice a week, cut off contact with Lacey for good, and tried to repair his relationship with his children. Slowly, he started to listen to their stories, their needs, their silences. But every time Whitney came by to drop them off, he found himself caught between pride and heartbreak. She looked so different now, not just physically, but spiritually. The woman who once cried herself to sleep now laughed easily. The woman who used to shrink into corners now walked into every room like she belonged there. And she did. He noticed how the kids clung to her joy, how even their voices were brighter around her. It was painful, but it was also healing to see her thriving. He had loved her in his own flawed way. But he'd loved himself more. And now he understood the cost of that. Whitney, on the other hand, wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She'd stopped living to be seen. Now she lived to feel, to be whole, to be free. Her days were filled with design work, laughter, and quiet moments with her children. Damien had become part of that new rhythm too, not as a savior, but as a gentle presence who respected her space. They'd never labeled what they were. Some days he'd help her paint, other days, they'd just share coffee and stories about their pasts. It wasn't love built on desperation or fixing what was broken. It was something calmer, love that didn't need permission. One evening, as she stood by the window watching the sunset, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Trent. I don't want to ruin your peace, Whit. I just want to thank you for everything you taught me, even through my mistakes. She smiled softly, typing back. Then keep learning. That's the best way to thank me. A few weeks later, their youngest daughter had a school recital. The auditorium was packed with parents. Whitney sat in the front row beside Damien, while Trent lingered in the back, unsure if he belonged there. When their daughter spotted him, she waved excitedly, calling, "Daddy," and he smiled for the first time in weeks. During the performance, Whitney turned slightly, their eyes meeting across the crowd. It wasn't awkward or bitter anymore, just quiet understanding. After the show, they met in the hallway. "You did good, Trent," Whitney said gently. "She needed to see you there." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're doing great with them, Whit. You're incredible." She smiled. "I'm just being me. Finally." He chuckled weakly. "Yeah, I think I like you better this way. Even if it means you're not mine anymore." Whitney's expression softened. "I was never supposed to belong to anyone, Trent. I was supposed to be loved." He nodded slowly, the truth settling like a quiet confession. "I get that now." They stood there in silence for a moment, surrounded by the buzz of families, laughter, and music. For the first time in a long while, there was peace between them, not the fragile kind that comes from denial, but the solid kind that comes from acceptance. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Whitney sat by her window again. The sky was clear, the city lights glowing softly across the horizon. She thought about everything: the hurt, the healing, the woman she used to be, and the one she'd become. She didn't hate Trent anymore. In fact, she silently thanked him, because without the pain he caused, she never would have rediscovered her strength. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed is how you find who you really are. Whitney's story isn't about revenge. It's about realization. She didn't need to punish him to win. Her peace was her victory. Her growth was the revenge. Sometimes, the person who breaks you is also the one who forces you to rise. And when you finally do, you realize they never destroyed you. They only revealed what you were capable of surviving. If you've ever loved someone who forgot your worth, remember this: love doesn't make you smaller. Real love lets you breathe, lets you heal, lets you grow. If Whitney's story moved you, if it reminded you that self-worth is louder than heartbreak, don't just scroll away. Tap like to remind yourself that healing is possible. Leave a comment to tell us what part of Whitney's journey spoke to you the most. And subscribe, not for numbers, but to keep these stories alive. Because every click, every heart, every word you share keeps another person from giving up on themselves. Weeks later, Whitney's design studio got featured in a local magazine. From homemaker to home designer, the woman who rebuilt more than houses. When she saw the article, she smiled softly. She wasn't rebuilding homes. She was rebuilding herself. That weekend, Damien surprised her with flowers. "For your feature," he said. She laughed. "You didn't have to." He smiled back. "I know. But I wanted to." As they walked through the city that evening, the wind in her hair, the laughter of her children echoing somewhere behind them, Whitney realized something. The best love stories don't always end in reconciliation. Sometimes they end in peace. And as the camera of life slowly panned out on her new beginning, she whispered softly, maybe to herself, maybe to the world, "You can lose everything and still find yourself. That's the real happy ending."